Hello and welcome, everyone. Lovely to see your beautiful faces. Hi, Marianne. So nice to see you. Hello, everyone. Guys, welcome to our fourth intergalactic Space for Change. Today's topic is going to be resistance to change. And is there such thing as irresistible change? I've got to say there is, because we've got a really exciting speaker today, Rob Scott, who is a global lead, HCM and behavioral technologist at Smart Work WFM. And it's really exciting to be here today. I don't know if all of you know me. I know a couple of familiar faces and a couple of familiar names. So just jump into the chat. Let me know where you're dialing in from. Jump in there. Let me know where you're dialing in from. I'm dialing in from New York City. Jody, Adelaide, I love it. Look how global we are already. New York City. Hi, Jessica, Veronica. Good morning from Sydney. It's evening over here. Maryland. Hey, Andrea. Congratulations on your graduation. Aviva, hi from Melbourne. Nice to meet you. Fantastic. Guys, I love it. We are a global audience here today for the topic of resistance to change. So I'm going to hand it off to our esteemed host, Andrew Buto.
Oh, esteemed, I like that. Hello, everybody. If you are able to, please turn your videos on so we can connect human to human. I see a lot of familiar faces and some amazing new faces, so welcome aboard. And yeah, this is all about us connecting globally and finding more human-centric ways to approach change. So very excited about this one. But as always, with Space for Change, we always start with you, and we want to hear from you, our audience. So I'm sure most of us know how to use a QR code and use the camera on our phone. So pick up your phones and scan the QR code over there. If you don't know how to use a QR code with your camera, that's perfectly okay. You just need to grab your phone. Just give me a sec, sorry. Let me get the QR code. Somewhere there, it's not behaving. You can go on your browser on your phone and go to ahaslides.com/starship. We're sticking with the space team this morning. Thank you, Christina, for getting me started on that. So there's the QR code. We've got 6 people in there. We've got 7, 8. See you all dialing in. We've got some more people coming into the Zoom. So I've got 11 people almost there. Got about 13. And we want to hear from you all about resistance. So let's jump in, shall we? I'm going to give it a couple more seconds. Geez, you guys are getting quicker and quicker at scanning. It's amazing. All right, so let's jump in. Where do you encounter the most change resistance? Some of you might have already had that question and already been there. Hey, Simone. Wonderful. So it looks like we've got a couple of votes there. So again, if you're just joining us, use your phone and go to ahaslides.com/starship. It's at the top there. So it looks like executives and board members, wow. There's a few of us that say low, but generally people are saying that's where a lot of resistance comes. And I'm glad you say that, because that's why we've asked Rob Scott to join, because he's going to be talking about what resistance looks like at that sponsorship level and why, and give us a lens. Looks like leadership's doing okay, sort of flatlining there. Management, yes, oh my goodness, hey, it seems like even though we're at that upper phase, it's the people who are dealing with people that resist. And look at this, isn't it amazing? This used to be maybe 10 years ago, the biggest area of resistance. But we're seeing frontline and backline staff embracing change more. I don't know if it was COVID. I don't know if it was us all going through and becoming resilient after the pandemic, but people are really open to change and flexible work. So really what it's about is we're all agreeing it's really at an upper leadership level that we're battling with here. And I'm really glad we mentioned that. Awesome. Next question I'd like to know from you is resistance to change. What does that look like, sound like, and feel like for you specifically in your role as a change leader, project manager, whatever you're doing? Silence. Yes, those are the worst kind of resistors, right? Because you don't know them and they do the most damage usually towards the end of the project when everyone's excited and we think everything's going green and bam, it's frustrating. Passive aggressive. I see a lot of that. Instead of having open communication, it becomes a defensive passive aggression. Lack of engagement, no feedback, unwillingness to listen. That won't work here because we're different. Yes, I call it special and different syndrome. You know, every organization, we're special and different. And yes, there are unique things, but I do find, you know, when it comes to change, there's a lot of commonalities between all the projects I work on. Eyes rolling. Oh my gosh, you ever said that? I've seen that before. And it's good to pick up that body language because sometimes resistance isn't verbal. Sometimes resistance isn't just something that someone says or sends in an email. It can be body language as well, and we can pick that up if we're conscious enough. Can't we do it the old way? Yep, hanging on to the old. Dismissive behavior, microaggression. I agree, but I don't really. Yeah, it's that sort of ambiguity that just creates discomfort. Being actively disengaged. Guys, these are fantastic. And what I'm going to do is I will share these in the Space for Change LinkedIn group. If you're not on the LinkedIn group, don't worry. We'll show you how to get on that, or just search for Space for Change on LinkedIn and you'll find the group. All right, thank you for that. Change fatigue, lag, learned helplessness. I'm going to end off with this one because this is great. They complain a lot, but they're not willing to actually do the work. And it's almost like they want to outsource it to the change manager. I have a feeling that's from Alan because we've had a chat about that a while back. Thank you, Alan. Right, next question. What have you guys found to be effective in leading with and through resistance? And notice I say with and through resistance because that's really my style when it comes to change. I love resistance and I'll talk to you why. What works for you? Some of you may have to press next slide on your phone. So if you do need to do that. Authenticity, absolutely. Being real with people. And I believe that, especially after the last year, we all have an amazing bullshit meter. So being authentic is a really good way to establish trust. Patience, it is a long game and it's part of the process. I love the what's in it for me. And also we can extend that. What's in it for us? What's not in it for us as well, so we have a full story. One-on-ones, thank you. Getting down to that one-on-one level. Understanding the underlying trigger, absolutely. Most people look at resistance and try to manage it or fix it instead of understanding, well, what's that root cause and listening. I love empathy and planting seeds. That's my favorite go-to. By being empathetic, you earn the right to plant seeds, and there's some ways I'm going to share with you that obviously we train up all our change managers on, and there's so much content out there on those topics. A lasting focus. Wow, that's really powerful. Transparency and building trust through honesty and patience. I love it. A lot of patience. Hey, I feel like it's a lot of work for us as leaders to actually work on ourselves so that we can be patient, so that we can receive the stuff and not take it personally, and not see it necessarily as a bad thing. Respectful dissent, patience, lots of that. Co-design, thank you. That was the biggest one for me, getting into human-centered design and building it into our methodologies and using everything with a human-centric approach. That is doing change with people instead of two people has been the biggest breakthrough. And keep conversations going. I love this. Guys, this is fantastic. Again, I'm going to share this in the group. This is so good so we can learn from each other. Stepping back and listening, communicating like we're in their shoes, all fantastic. All right, last question. How is resistance to change not a bad thing? How is it a good thing? How is it something that if you're a leader, project manager, change manager, whatever your role is, communications, learning, how can you use resistance to an advantage? And notice what I'm doing here. I'm actually reframing, and this is another way to handle resistance, is just ask the question, how is it not a problem? It shows where more attention is required. Absolutely. It actually gives you the feedback where to aim your change and leadership efforts because you know what you're dealing with. Absolutely wonderful. And someone's put meters put there. You are knowing the unknowns. When people actually come to you and talk to you, it's great. Early identification of problems. Yes, my attitude to it is when people resist and tell you, it means that you've actually built trust with them and they feel safe enough to be honest with you. So I see that as a compliment, but it's also feedback. Someone's just mentioned. It's great feedback to what we work with, and it justifies what a lot of us do and have made careers like myself and Christina in the change space. And you get honesty. One complaint properly managed can be used to help hundreds. I love it. You get that one person who's brave enough to talk on behalf of other people. And it's incredible. It's a double check for project validity. Are we on track? And it's a great question, especially in an agile world. I just think this is agile. You get change feedback. It's fantastic. They're identifying issues so we can create a better solution. I love it. We're not limiting it to our steering committee or our ideas on change. We're actually asking people what works for them. And it widens the vision. And it's a chance to understand those drivers. Guys, absolutely great work. Thank you for that. And again, I will download this and share that in the group for us. So a little bit about my personal story and resistance. The first time I came across resistance was who can identify where this image comes from? Pop it in the chat for me. Where's this image from? No one identified? Star Wars! Thanks, Anne-Marie. Another fan there. Thanks, Marianne. So when I was a kid, I used to watch Star Wars. And what I loved about it was all about the Empire trying to dominate the universe. And you had the Rebel Alliance who was fighting back with Luke Skywalker and resisting this change and this domination. And what that meant for me is, you know, really early in my career, especially when I was working in big consultancies and that space, I used to think resistance was a bad thing, and that my job as a change manager and a leader was to literally develop solutions where there's no resistance, where change is absolutely irresistible and everyone just loves it. And it was a bit of a perfectionist mindset to change. So I used to be like this little stormtrooper there, looking for little areas and going, oh, it's a bad thing. Oh no, because, and a lot of that was driven with old school things like performance reviews, because they would look at certain feedbacks, but it wasn't really aligned to encourage people to resist and encourage me to handle it. It was more about project success, or did you fill out the templates properly? And this is what it looked like. And the more I got into change, the more I realized, whether you're an individual, whether you're a team, whether you're a company, that the way our brains work is we all have different experiences. And what I really got frustrated was with some of the methodologies and theories that said everybody handles change the same way. Science tells us we don't. Everybody has different stories and experiences. Every company does, every team does. And imagine how that changes as people come in and out. And we all make decisions and start recording beliefs in our minds. And this starts from a very young age, from the age of 0 to 7, all the way through school. But then when we go into companies, thank you, Anne-Marie. I love the Stormtrooper as well. When we get into companies, we can then form teams and cultures where we decide what we like and what we go towards and what our preferences are and what we move away from, and it's just a no-no. And we start forming an identity about ourselves, about our team, about our company, and about our culture. And I became really conscious of this. And what happens in the brain is by the age of 21 and through our lives, we start developing this resistance. It's called a critical factor, but I like to take it bigger and call it a cultural factor, where people just simply resist anything that doesn't agree with their values and their preferences. So obviously, if you're rolling out a change and it's in alignment with that, people tend to come along more. But if it's disaligned to it, and Rob's going to go into that, people tend to resist, and they might not even realize they're resisting when they do it. So I was taught in the old days, do the direct approach and give them what's in it for me, lists of benefits of the system, and tell them, give them all these beautiful PowerPoints and numbers and all the logic in the world. And similar to what you guys have said with your phones this morning, it would just bounce back. Or worse, I would just get silence and I would get that passive aggressive resistance. But then I remembered Star Wars, and I remembered there was a character, Yoda, and Yoda had a whole different approach when he was coaching Luke Skywalker. And he was more about exploring the person, understanding what that resistance, and using that resistance as an emotion to drive people forward into change. So I realized very quickly that if I radically accepted change, I could handle change a lot better. And, I started seeing change, any resistance as feedback that helped creativity. That was a really powerful thing for me to work with and drive it, because I don't think change can happen without that emotion. I always think that people make decisions emotionally and then use their logic to justify it. So if you've got that resistance, you've got an emotion to work with. And if we can help unpack what that is in a very indirect way, like Yoda did, that's where the magic happens. So over the years, I really went in and I honed in and I stopped focusing on the templates and the spreadsheets and the tools. And I started really working more on the human side of change and more indirect ways to do change, where we literally plant seeds. And it's almost like watching a movie like Star Wars. You don't watch Star Wars and go, oh, there's no such thing as this. We'll never go in space. People tend to open up their ability to listen and take in information when you take an indirect approach, just like watching a movie. So we said rapport and empathy. This is a skill, and I think it's a skill that we need to hone in, especially in this digital age. Questioning. Instead of resisting or justifying or getting defensive, the art of questioning and chunking up, chunking down, chunking laterally is a fantastic tool, because they say a problem or resistance, a problem half well stated is a problem half solved. So if you can ask questions to get that person to fully explain stuff, usually they come to their own conclusion and realize it's okay. And by doing all of that and by listening and questioning and truly being empathetic, we can then share our personal stories around resistance. We can use metaphors or analogies. I mean, this is so powerful in our change management toolkits when we train up change managers to actually build and gift wrap the solution that goes more indirectly and goes across their critical factor. And of course, the biggest breakthrough for me was human-centered design. So having spent years using human-centered design, the buy-in you just get up front, because people feel they're a part of it and they're working with you on it, and it's less confronting as opposed to the change being done to them. Does that make sense? I love what Mita said. Change managers won't have jobs if there's no resistance. Absolutely. So with that said, I want to hand over to Rob Scott. Rob, you're welcome to introduce yourselves, but I've known Rob for a very, very long time. He gave me my first job and role in Australia when I moved here all that time ago. And he's just honestly one of the gurus when it comes to HR technology, when it comes to change. And certainly we love having you in our orbit, as well as having Smart WFM as a collaborator in our orbit. So Rob, over to you.
Hey, Andrew, thank you so much. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm just looking at this picture on my right-hand side. And by the way, if you think I'm not looking at you, it's because I've got this screen that's like 1.5 meters wide, and I've got things stretched across here. But it's fantastic, just looking at all the comments and faces. And, thanks, Andrew. I love working with you, actually. You've always been so energetic and passionate in terms of what you do. And I'm glad that I've had this opportunity to come and chat to you. I think, just briefly, my background is predominantly been in both technology and in HR. And what I call myself is a behavioral technologist, because that's not too different from what a change person does. I have one foot in technology and I have one side of me that really sort of focuses on human behavior. And that intersect point is where so much happens. And from a change perspective, this is the oyster, because we are moving into an era where we simply I'm not going to be able to avoid technology, and the way that technology is coming into our lives is becoming faster. Just to throw a number to you, the other day I was talking to a group where I said, at the moment, our jobs change about 2% per annum, and we're going to get a 5 times fold increase over the next 3 to 5 years with the influence of technology and advanced technology coming in. And from a change management perspective, we're going to see so much coming our way from regards to resistance, particularly at the leadership level. And that's where I want to focus today, to really sort of unpack the concept of maturity and how that plays out at the executive and management level. And I was really glad with that first question you asked, Andrew, because it is true. We are seeing significant amount of resistance that's coming from the executive level. But here's the real issue that I found, that often that resistance is not conscious with the executives. They're kind of doing their daily thing, and they're carrying on with life, and they're moving forward thinking that everything's okay, not realizing how their behaviors and approach to running businesses are actually influencing or creating resistance. So that's what I'm going to take you through today. And let me talk about maturity first, because very often the concept or the word maturity, comes across incorrectly. It's got nothing to do with age. It's got nothing to do with tenure of your role in an organization. What it really does do, it's about how we think about things. It's about the maturity of, for example, how we think about people in the workplace, or it's the maturity of our thinking around the value of, or the definition of value. Do we think, for example, of just about financial value in organizations, or do we recognize and understand there are other forms of value too? So the reason why I want to focus a little bit initially on maturity is because it has a really important play in terms of how we deal with resistance. The other thing I'll just mention is that I've been focusing on maturity probably for the last 15 years in unpacking it. So this is not a simple, PowerPoint slide that's got 4 blocks and you kind of choose what level of maturity on. There's a lot more sophistication and research that's gone into understanding this. So, all right, let's get going on this. The first thing that I want to talk about is really just take, I guess, probably a really simple example around a flawed hypothesis. And you'll know from your perspective being involved in the change space that you often get challenged with, hey, we've got to really increase employee engagement. And I want you to build a change program that's going to help me do that. And the end result is that I want to get increased business value. Now, that's all very laudable and great. But what we really sometimes misunderstand is that whilst there is absolute correlation between, for example, getting increased employee engagement and increased business value, what we misunderstand is that the real causality behind that is not necessarily what we think it is. And often we tend to blame things like the technology, or we want to point fingers at the IT department, or we point fingers at managers for not building enough trust amongst their employees, or we blame the lack of a strategic clarity that creates confusion. But in my experience, the disconnection is not related to the lack of trying to improve engagement, particularly in the people change space, but it's the belief that we're in control of the outcome, when in fact we're not. So think about that, because there are specific factors that determine how maturely your organization responds to constructs like engagement and change management, which have a disproportionate impact on your ability to be successful. So that's what I want to really delve into a little bit today. So if we move to the next slide, I want to really introduce you to this concept of maturity in relation to the work that we do. So what we do know is that there's a direct relationship between the level of maturity and your ability to create effective change in organizations. Now, this doesn't have to only be change. It could be many different things that we could relate that to. And really, to understand that relationship is so important, because this is where most executives and leaders don't want to understand that, or just don't see the relationship. But in our research, we've picked up that there's absolutely a clear relationship, and that maturity ultimately is a causal effect of your ability to drive change in the organization or achieve a particular objective. So that relationship is important. If I look at just a basic example around this, what I want to call out is 2 specific things. The first thing is that maturity can be seen from a perspective of what your organization has been allowed to mature to. So if I put a change hat, for example, does the executive actually view change and change management as something really strategic and important? In other words, they've allowed the organization to become that, to reach that level of mature thinking. And the second one is, are the individuals actually doing the change at a level of competency where they do think beyond that we are here just to sort of do rah-rah, create a couple of great communication slides, but strategically do understand the drive behind what they're doing. So there's 2 components that are really important. What is the organization allowing the change function to be able to do? And secondly, are we ourselves as individuals competent in helping the organization move to that level that we need to be? And if I look at a specific example, and I'll use an HR one here because it's what I do, but also you'll see the change link here. Let's say, for example, an organization wants to put in a new performance management system, and they come along and they say, hey, Andrew, we want you to build a change plan around this, because we want to make sure that this piece of technology is well accepted and people are better engaged and they really sort of achieve more with the technology. So if you're not at the right level of maturity, what's going to happen is that you're never going to reach that level of nirvana, because either the organization doesn't allow you to do that because they're at a too low a maturity level, and the executives go, yeah, let the HR department put in their performance management tool. But you know what? We'll make our own decisions when it comes to, promotions. In other words, we don't go back to the tools that we put in place. Or secondly, there's an expectation that happens, but the change person just doesn't really understand the real intent behind moving the organization to a new place, and simply doing communication and basic sort of stuff. Okay, so that's an example, and let me introduce you to the actual change model itself, the maturity model. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is a whole conversation on its own. But in essence, the maturity model, and this is what I worked with since 2012 with Paul Kearns in London. We built this framework with King's College in London, Professor Dave Collins, who you may have heard of from Dublin University, Professor Astra Bajantio from Reykjavik Business School, and then Paul is an economist. And what we found out was that there were these 6 stages that organizations typically go through from a maturity point of view. On the left-hand side of the wall in the middle is essentially when you are non-strategic. So if I had to relay this from a change perspective, if you were a stage 0 maturity change organization, then the executive would simply think that change is all fluff. And, we just tell people what to do. There's no conscious understanding of that. You might then be at a stage 2, for example, where there's good practice happen. You've got good methodology, good approach in terms of how we introduce change, but it's still not strategic. On the other side, or the right-hand side of the wall, is significantly different. That's when the organization truly understands the value of what change can bring to the organization in terms of the way that we shift people from A to B. And that is actually not that common. And we find a lot of organizations are not there yet. But that wall in the middle is critical, because if you're to the left of the wall as an organization, you'll find it very difficult to drive strategic change in the organization. You will be mainly focused on doing transactional type change, the basics almost. So it's really important that we help organizations move across that wall, because that's when you can absolutely deal with resistance in a really positive way. And particularly, I'll go back to my opening remark, we're going to see significant change, 10 times more or 5 times more change in everybody's job over the next 3 to 5 years. As change practitioners, we absolutely need to make sure our organizations are thinking in a mature stage. Otherwise, we're going to find it frustrating, to actually achieve that. And let me call out 2 scenarios. So if we look at scenario A, what we'll see, for example, is that we have a situation where the executive are sitting on the left-hand side of that model. In other words, they don't really see change management as anything significant or strategic. We rather just see it as some really good, effective ways of telling people what they need to do. On the right-hand side, though, you might have a change practitioner who really sits in a mature stage, and they understand what change is really going to help an organization achieve. When you get that sort of split, we get what we call this credibility killer syndrome. It's so frustrating as a change person to realize that your leaders actually don't understand what you're trying to do, and they simply see you as the people putting up balloons and putting on a couple of PowerPoint presentations, and they miss it completely. And it's sad, but it's frustrating. And your role partly in that situation is you have to learn to educate your executive around their level of maturity that's actually causing that to happen, or their perception around maturity of what change can do. The second scenario is the reverse. So for example, we might get a situation where the executive genuinely understand that strategic change can be so vital to this organization's ability to remain competitive and to really sort of create value around what they do as an organization. But yet on the left-hand side, as a practitioner, maybe you're junior, maybe you just haven't had the experience, you think of change management in a non-strategic way. So I've got to put a great pack together. I've done that, tick the box. I've sent it out. Great, we've communicated. That's all that I need to do. completely missing the point that, you know, you're actually trying to drive strategic change in the organization. And in that case, what we really find is that we call that scenario the knee-jerk syndrome. And the reason why we call that out is because often it's the executives going, hey, come on, guys, you know, we're expecting more. And then you respond to that. Okay, I'll do another PowerPoint or do something more. And you really just don't get it. And that's often just a lack of experience, but also exposure to the fact that maturity in the organization is quite silent often. And very often you don't necessarily see it or understand it, or you just can't put your finger on why something isn't happening like you thought it was going to happen. So that's just a little bit of background about maturity. And the only reason I've given you that exposure is because I want to bring you to this model and get you to sort of think about this from a resistance point of view. Moving forward in all organizations, we really do have to think about three constructs, and that is people, technology, and environments. I'm not going to go into massive detail around all of these, but all that I want to say here is that these three things, when they are misaligned, create resistance. Let's take, for example, the link between people and environment. And it's a great example that we can choose from. So people, we understand the behavior, and we also can understand the concept of an environment. I'm going to use COVID, for example. So when we had a situation when lots of people had to work from home, that's what we would call an environment. In other words, we set that up, we allowed people to work in that environment. But the relationship between people and that environment was often misunderstood, which is why we learned so much during COVID. We didn't necessarily realize that the bi-directional relationship was actually so important, that people don't operate in a vacuum. And so there was resistance in some stages. Sometimes it was the leaders who said, I don't trust people to work at home. And so we had to deal with that. But all three of those things are really important. If you're going to maximize the value of people ultimately, and if you're going to use change as a mechanism to achieve that maximum value, then alignment between those three bubbles is so important. Let's take another one, which is around people and technology, for example. Very often we think we switch on technology, we've done our job, the IT department's done our job, and we leave it. But in today's world, technology is so powerful that the technology is actually influencing your behavior as a person. And likewise, your behavior as an individual determines how technology responds to you. So for example, because we can add in things like personalization into technology, you may respond or react in a way, and the technology actually reflects that. Now, again, when that's not understood, in other words, you don't understand the behavioral aspects between those two, we get resistance. We get people who don't want to use the technology because it's actually not talking or using to them, and it doesn't necessarily empower them. So those three things in the middle are, if I had to sort of just put a square around that to say, from a change point of view, the bidirectional relationship between each of those three bubbles must be well understood from a change perspective. If you don't get that right, you'll always have forms of resistance or forms of misunderstanding that will not allow you to maximize value. So let me move now to the outer square of those things. You'll see there's 7 items on there which relate very specifically to the maturity model I spoke about earlier. These are the things that leaders are in charge of. Now, I'll let you think about that for a moment, because those are the levers that determine levels of maturity. So let's take, for example, something like value motive in the top left-hand corner. If an organization's leadership are only in business because they want to make money and their sole focus is financial returns, then they've misunderstood what real value is. They are not recognizing, for example, that people can offer different forms of value. In that case, they would typically score quite low on the maturity score or the maturity scale in terms of that level of maturity. That in itself creates resistance. Let's play that out. So you want to make a change in the organization, or you want to bring people into a new place. The mindset of the executive is, does this make me more money or not? And if it doesn't, I'm not interested in other words, there's a form of resistance that comes in there automatically. Let's take another one, for example, like trust. When the executive don't create an environment of trust, then again, your ability to be effective in terms of your change engagement is reduced. I'm not saying it never happens, but you'll never reach that level of maximum or optimal change that you are hoping for, because trust, which is so important, doesn't exist. And we saw that in COVID as well, where lots of managers did not trust their employees working from home. If I can't see you, I don't trust you. And that resistance needed to be broken. The other one that I really like talking about is whole system thinking. The design of your organization, often when it ends up being siloed, then we end up in a situation where organizations have these boundaries that are created because of the siloed nature of the building. So we don't think of our organization as a whole system. We break it up, we give it a P&L, we give you responsibilities, we measure you against that P&L. That creates resistance. And I'm pretty sure all of you experience trying to sort of break down that kind of boundary is so tough, because the manager just says, I'm not going to do that. That's not how I'm measured. My role is, and he gives you a long story around why he shouldn't have to change. So the issue is that it's no use tackling that at that level, because the individual, that manager, cannot change that. You need to lift that up to the executive level to get them to understand that their lack of whole system thinking actually creates a level of resistance that's almost impossible to break. And whilst many organizations have departments, we're not saying that you shouldn't have a department or a structural breakdown. How the organization executive manage that whole system thinking across the organization is where you want it to mature. So as a change person, my recommendation to you is that you've got to get to understand what the level of maturity is, particularly around those 7 outer edges first, because that will be telling for you around how much you are likely to achieve in your change intervention. So put in the amount of effort that's required to do the change. Let's say, I'll just use an arbitrary number. Let's say, for example, the maturity level is sitting at a 3. Then you can do some really good change work, and it's going to be well accepted because people recognize that change is actually a function that can really be important to the organization. But don't push it to the extent that you think they're at a 6 when they're not, because what you'll do is put in a whole lot of effort that doesn't get recognized. What I'd rather do is spend that effort, that additional effort, and work with the executive or leadership to get them to understand how they can change, and that will influence the business. So rather than just spending the same focus point on change with the executive, go into a discussion with them talking around maturity. Let's talk about trust. Let's talk about risk. Let's talk about communication. Let's talk about whole system thinking, because those are the things that ultimately have a disproportionate impact on your ability to put change through the organization. So I'll just sort of round this up quickly to say that no matter what we want to throw at this model, and it's a great model to use as a discussion point, is, whether you take something like wellness, whether you take something like engagement, whether you take something like culture, you can use this model to have that discussion to understand where that resistance may reside, but also what needs to do to maximize the value of people across these various entities. And the inner circles are great. So for example, if I took a culture lens and I would say, what's the culture that I need to focus on if my environment is a work from home, or I've got a hybrid model? Then, culture, for example, was predominantly built on face-to-face, office-based, everybody's in the same space. Now that's not true. So much of the culture that we're experiencing needs to change because our environments are going to be multifaceted. And you'll all love this. I call this environmental diversity, in the sense that we should not just simply look at our environments from a point of view of the physical. We need to identify that other environments have different types of value. So working from home as an environment has got a different value construct that you need to think about. A hybrid environment has a different set of values. A digital environment where you may house a lot of your technology or AI, like your bots and things like that, actually has a different set of values. If you're using immersive technologies like augmented reality, that's a different environment that has a different set of values. And so understanding those things in a way, and understanding their bi-directional relationship with the people and the technology is important. And then the outer layer is deal with that from an executive point of view. And those are the things that will really help you understand, I guess, where that resistance actually is coming from. And I'll go back to my one point just to round off. over the last 10 or 12 years, having used these constructs to talk to executives, most of them don't realize what that's actually causing down the line. They go, well, of course, we've got to focus on financial value. Absolutely. We're not saying you shouldn't, but it doesn't mean you cannot have other forms of value at the same time. But your focus purely on financial value is actually excluding that other value from surfacing in your organization. Anyway, I could talk for hours on this. I don't want to sort of hog the time. It's a great topic. And if any of you are keen to sort of explore that more or want to really, dive deeper into the concept of maturity and what that means, please reach out, or you reach out to Andrew again. More than happy to come and do some more talking around this. So hopefully that's tweaked a little bit of interest. And Andrew, thank you so much for the invite and being able to join your team here.
Huge round of applause for Rob. Hey, wow. Rob, every time I listen to you, I just get so much. And judging by the chat, oh my God, we had Andrea talking about transactional versus transformational and linking what you said to open and closed systems. Definitely reach out to Andrea about that. I know she studied a lot on that. Alan, loved your comment listening to Rob when you were talking about this actually starts at a business case level. And this is why with our methodology, we actually start with return on investment for change to link to that business case, because it's an opportunity to build maturity at that level. And sometimes we don't even get to see that business case. But even if you get handed it, make that link clear. And Marianne, I knew you would love this. And so with Anna-Marie is also talking about transactional approach and how it affects culture. So really important, if you just focus on the financial element of it or purely an agenda politically, we miss out on all this additional value. So that's very, very clear. So Rob, thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Man, this was power. I have been recording the session, so we'll be sending that to you guys in the LinkedIn group. Wow. So rounding up, guys, again, thank you for joining us. We still have opportunities. Christina and I run this monthly. So if you want to stay connected, look up Space for Change on LinkedIn and join our LinkedIn group. And that's where we ask you what topics you want to talk about and we organize the group. So have a check in there. I think Hugo might put a link in there. Secondly, we want your feedback. How did we go? What are topics you'd like to hear about? But this feedback form's quite special because Christina and we've got some public courses coming up in human-centered design, managing resistance, linking change to maturity, as well as return on investment. So if you do fill out the feedback, you are in a competition to win a fully paid for bursary to one of our public courses, and we would love to have you on board. There is a question you've got to answer, and we'll be announcing the winner in the next week or so to join one of our programs. And obviously check out our website if you're keen to come join us and do some of our courses around human-centered design, collaborative technology, resistance and maturity. Our website is www.earthtomars.com.au. Have a look in there, and if our stars align, click a button and one of our team will reach out to you. So thanks again, everybody. Wonderful, wonderful morning. Go well, go spread the story of maturity and go love your clients out there and be the light bearers for the world when it comes to leading change into this exciting world. Have a good one, guys. Lots of love and see you in a month.